all these black, you know, we exaggerate how many black people ran away to the North Star. Even John Hope Franklin, at most, counted 50,000. And that includes people who would just run down to the swamp, hide out for the night, and then come back. You know, it was hard to run away to the north. There were not millions of black people on the Underground Railroad. We tend to think of the Underground Railroad like Penn Station, a Grand Central Station. It wasn't like that. It was incredibly difficult to escape from slavery. And, as you know, Mr. Black, many of the free Negroes stayed in the South. Do you know in the 1860 census, there were 440,000 about free Negroes. I mentioned that earlier. More than half lived in the states that were the Confederacy and the border states where slavery was free. And they stayed there, ladies and gentlemen, unmolested, including my family in eastern West Virginia. They stayed there because that's where they had their family and that's where they had their property. Remember, their property was, they had to be given property in Virginia and many of these other southern states. What are they going to do? Go to New York? Live in Harlem? Hang out and listen to jazz with Dizzy, you know, Charlie Parker? They stayed where they were raised. And many of them, this is the worst, the dirtiest secret in African American history, is that a surprisingly high percentage of the free Negroes in the South owned slaves themselves. And some of them owned, we explain it away by saying, oh, but they only own their mother, or they only own, yeah, they own their mother, they own their sister, they own their wife, and they own some other workers too. A surprisingly high number owned workers who they did not liberate throughout the South. There were enough black free Negroes who supported the Confederacy that they voluntarily formed a regiment in the state of North Carolina to fight for the Confederacy. And black Confederate troops are featured on the cover of Harper's Weekly in 1863. Frederick Douglass used this as an argument to make Lincoln allow black men to fight. Wow. Because, remember, Lincoln didn't want to do it. Lincoln made a famous statement in 1862. He said, I suppose we could arm them, but if we did, their arms would end up in the hands of the Confederates within a week, because he thought that they were incompetent, not smart enough to win. And eventually, as I said, the North was losing the war. Frederick Douglass was agitating, and this book by Casemore persuaded him to change his mind, and incrementally. So, again, it's not only the myth makers who created the idealized Lincoln. We have our own myth makers in the African American historical establishment. All the Egyptians looked like Michael Jordan. All our people were black gods and kings. You know, we were not complicitous in the slave trade. There wouldn't be a slave trade. Africans sold other Africans to white people. That was the slave trade. That's the first thing we honestly have to admit. Remember the story of Livingston, Dr. Livingston? Sure. The reason that was so important is that almost no white men had penetrated the interior of Africa. What was there? No roads, snakes, mosquitoes, death, malaria, right? The white people were along the coast. It was black kingdoms like Queen Njinga's kingdom in Angola. What's now Angola? Ghana, Dahomey. They grew rich from the slave trade, selling other Africans. They would go and wage wars just to sell other black people to white people. This is something we've been so ashamed about, we pretend that it's not true. It is the nasty, dirty secret of African American history. We are just as corrupt and despicable as any other people. And if we have the right to oppress, we will oppress just like the white man oppressed us. That is human nature. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. And the only way to overcome that is to be honest about it. Admit the truth, and then all try to do better. As my main man, guy I admire so much, Cornel West, says, we're all recovering racists. We're all recovering racists.
Dr. Gates has to leave.
Thank you. Thank you.
Timmy. Dr. Gates has to leave, so there will be no more questions. I'm terribly sorry. I could sit here for hours. I feel enlightened. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure tonight.
That was great.
Henry Louis Gates and Rick Hogan, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., thank you for being with us. Eileen Makovich and the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission, thank you for being with us. Good night.